Number 4, where did Mordecai go after being honored by the king? B, to the king's gate. He went back to the king's gate. Number 5, complete the following words of Teresh. If Mordecai is of the Jewish people, you will, D, not overcome him. So the answers were D, B, A, B, D. Okay, Esther 6, verse 11, the second half. It says this, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And so the 5 words were done, man, king, delights, and honor. Anybody get all 10 right? Good job, Kathy. 9, Fred and Cindy. 8? 8, Mom. Okay, good work. All right, well, Esther chapter 7. We finally come to the big moment, the culmination, really, of the work of Haman and Esther. Haman's going to finally kind of get what he deserves in this moment, and we're going to see an important point that we look at, because as we look at what Esther does, even in the text for today, it seems like sometimes she bumps into some things that might be a little bit uncomfortable for us as Christians to recommend. She does things maybe that seem a little bit deceptive, a little bit in order to get her desired end result. And so if we were to look at that, if somebody were to come to you as a Christian, I'm thinking about this, should I do this? Should I just confront him? Should I just say, hey, look, here's what's going on? Or should I kind of go through this thing where I'm going to lure him in and then nab him? And that comes off as a little bit not Christ-like. Like it seems like there's not grace in it. It seems like the whole purpose and intent, in fact, it doesn't seem like the whole purpose and intent is to nab Haman for what he's done wrong and to save her people. And so we're going to see that she's going to act in a way that's kind of cunning, they're certainly wise, but maybe some things that she does that, as we would look through all this, that we would kind of wonder whether or not this really is Christ-like behavior. And so we're going to look at it tonight from that perspective, and using a text from the book of Matthew to kind of help give us some meaning to it. But let's look at Esther chapter 7. Let's see how Haman finally gets what he deserves. As Esther is going to come out of the shadows, she's going to finally admit that she's a Jew. She's going to lay that before the king at this point. She's put a lot of work, a lot of effort into concealing that. And now here's the big moment. Here's where the big reveal. She's going to show herself for who she is and lay out there what it is that she's asking of the king. So Esther chapter 7, beginning at verse 1, it says this. It says, so the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request, even to the half of my kingdom? It shall be fulfilled. And so we are again to that point where the king is giving her the opportunity to tell me what you want. Now, it is interesting that there seems to be, every time there's kind of a decision made, there seems to be a lot of wine associated with it. Over and over again. In fact, every time somebody's drinking wine, there ends up being some kind of problem occurs as a result of this. There might be a little bit of lesson in that for us. But we're going to see in this that the 3 different times in this chapter, it's mentioned they were drinking wine or went back to drinking wine or something like that. And it usually is connected to some not so good news for somebody in the text here. And so in chapter 7 now, verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish and my people for my request. Now, I think something interesting there, and it is that she begins her appeal not for the whole group of everybody, it's not my people right off the bat. She doesn't begin with the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. Who does she begin with in this request for salvation, preservation? Herself. She begins with herself. And then built upon that is going to be followed up then, kind of on her shoulders then comes the rest of the Jewish people. So verse 4. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss of the king. There's a whole bunch in that one verse. One is that it is if we were in this slave kind of position or relationship, I wouldn't even came to you. That wouldn't even be anything I would have really worried about. The problem is that we're supposed to be killed, and that's what makes this a big deal. And there's agreement. I agree with her on that. But interesting that she would be okay with slavery. Now, I think it's interesting in the fact that isn't she already somewhat of a slave? Isn't she really in a kind of a slave relationship at this point? Did she have any choice in becoming a part of the king's harem? Did she have any choice in whether or not she was going to be selected to be the king's wife, the queen? No, that really, she already exists in that kind of position, I would say. But she's saying if that's what it was, if it was just limited to that, I wouldn't worry about it. But here's the problem. The problem is we were going to be killed. And then, very interestingly, the next point is this, and there would be a personal loss for you. There would be a material, financial loss to you, king. And so now she makes an appeal to him, and we're going to see that her appeal seems a little bit, there's multiple layers to it, but part of her appeal is, look, if this happens, this is going to affect you financially. You're going to take a hit for this. And so she's appealing to them on that level with the loss that's going to occur to him as a result of this. Verse 5, then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, who is he, and where is he, and who has dared to do this? And so Esther has been working for days and days towards this moment, towards this opportunity, because now the king's like, who he is? Let me at him. I will tear him apart. Just tell me who it is. And of course, at this point, if we can imagine Haman, at this point, he is like slinking down behind his goblet. He is like realizes that like the gig's up, that he's about ready to be exposed for who he is. And so it says this, and Esther said, a foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. And so she, and right here in this party that exists pretty much of the king, the queen, and Haman, and she sits and says, that's the guy right there. That's the guy who's done this. And of course, at that point, up to that point, the king would have no idea that Haman had conspired to do this, and that it was going to personally affect who? The queen. This wasn't just a group of people. This has affected the palace. Now, is Haman aware of that? Now he is, right? Up to this point, Haman would have had no idea that she was of Jewish descent. He's not aware of that. And now he's aware of that because it's been made known here at this as she presents this to the king. And the king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking again and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. Now, interesting kind of idea. Why would the king walk out? Why would the king leave the room? Any ideas why that might be the case, Betty? Okay, so he's feeling betrayed at this point. Haman has been his right-hand man, and now he's experiencing betrayal. And in his betrayal, what would be the purpose of leaving the room? Okay, you think there's an element of trying to control himself in this moment. Any other thoughts on why he would leave the room? He didn't want to see him? He didn't want to see Haman? Okay. Okay, wanted to think what to do without having to look at Haman. Now, Shirley. Okay, you might wonder why. Now, he doesn't inquire that, though, does he? But might wonder why. How did I miss this when Esther's so completely aware of this? Part of the answer to that might be, though, is because Esther's affected by this, and he wasn't aware that Esther was a Jewish person, even though he signed this edict. I mean, ultimately, Haman gets the brunt of this. But the problem is, and I think probably the problem for Ahasuerus is that he signed off on this. That not only did Haman certainly conspire to bring this about, he ended up led him into signing off on it. And I think that might be part of the reason why he's got to just get away and think, because he's got to consider how do I get out of this? What do I do about this? Because I signed off on this. I'm at least partially responsible for this. In fact, this is his prime minister. This is if in our nation the president feels betrayed by the vice president. What do you do about that? He's got to think about this, because this could have big ramifications for the kingdom. And so I think probably there's this element of how do I get out of this? How do I deal with this in a way that is going to save face for me? Because that's much of what the king wants accomplished. I don't want to look bad. I don't want to look foolish in front of my people. In fact, I mean, here's an opportunity for division. If the king has the prime minister, the second in command, killed, that could cause problems in the kingdom. And so maybe all of that has caused the king to want to think through this a little bit before he makes a decision. Verse 8, and the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And so if the king hadn't been able to figure out, how am I going to deal with this? What am I going to do about this? He does now. Because when he walks in the room and essentially Haman's stretched out on the couch with the queen, he now has all the evidence, all the proof he needs to get rid of Haman. And so, and the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house? Now, I was reading some commentaries on this, and Jewish commentaries, some Jewish commentaries on this, say that an angel pushed Haman down onto the couch. That's the Jewish tradition to the story or something, that the Haman would get up and the angel would push him back down until the king walked in, and he was going to get caught on the couch. Yeah. Teresa's speculating it had something to do with the wine. And really, it isn't necessary in the story. We don't need that to believe the story. I mean, it seems obvious to me. He's distraught. He knows that he's in big trouble, and he knows that the only possible person that can intercede on his behalf is Esther. This is the only one that maybe has a possibility of getting him out of this. And so he is, I think, he's simply on his knees at the couch, attempting to sway her. Shirley? He is certainly groveling. He is absolutely groveling. And isn't it ironic that what was it that upset Haman about Mordecai? He would not bow down. He would not bow down. The Jewish man would not bow down to the prime minister, the guy that was second in command of the kingdom. And now now the guy that's second in command in the kingdom is bowing down to a Jewish woman. And we know in that culture that would even be a worse affront to the sensibilities of the Persian people. And so as the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Now this is interesting, because they're in this moment, that what was significant of that, what did that mean? That means he's dead. That he is headed to the gallows. He's headed to wherever. When they covered his head, that was a sign that execution was coming next. Now, has the king called for his execution at this point? He has not. He has not. But it is known in the kingdom, it is known of those that are around that this is an execution. That this man is going to die. And so they immediately cover his face in preparation for what's about to occur. Then Harbona. I love this part of the story. Harbona. We don't know anything about Harbona. We've never heard of Harbona before. All of a sudden, Harbona steps in, and he's going to play a kind of critical role in this story. Remember last week we talked about all the little intricacies, all the little things that had to happen in order that something else happened. And that Esther completed a very kind of small portion of this, and everything else were all these kind of random occurrences that proceeded and brought about the desired outcome of God. And so only a small amount of what has been accomplished was accomplished by Esther. Almost everything else accomplished by God. And then here in this story jumps in this guy Harbona, who we don't know anything about, but he's going to play an important role in what is about to happen in the story. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Moreover, just so happens the gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordecai, whose words saved the king, is standing in Haman's house 50 cubits high." And so Harbona says, it just so happens there is a gallows 50 cubits high over at Haman's house. Now, I don't know if he was going to make a recommendation to the king, but the king doesn't need that recommendation. He already knows where this is headed, because he says, hang him on that. And so Harbona, who we don't know anything about, plays this, informs the king of something the king wasn't aware of, that Haman had prepared a gallows 50 cubits high in order to hang Mordecai on. And Harbona says, it just so happens there is a gallows outside of Haman's house that was intended for Mordecai. So what was Harbona thinking? He's thinking, that seems like that would be an appropriate place for Haman to experience his punishment. And the king said, hang him on that. So they hang Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king was abated. And so this irony of the story, that everything that Haman is doing to bring about the end of Mordecai, now all comes back to him. Everything is going to be experienced by him that he intended for Mordecai. And all of these things, all these random things happening that was Esther aware that Haman had prepared a gallows for Mordecai? There's no evidence of that. We have no reason to believe that. That all these things that were going on that probably Esther wasn't aware of, the king wasn't aware of, and now maybe Mordecai wasn't aware of, and now all of a sudden all of it comes together, and Mordecai is going to get what he deserved. What? Yes, Mom. Yeah. Well, I agree that it was part of when he had to walk through the city, leading the horse with Mordecai on it, declaring the praises. That had to be the most humiliating experience for him. But I guarantee you, he would take that 100 times over the gallows that awaits him. And so, as bad as that would have been for him, this is going to be the ultimate. 75 feet, yes, that's right. It's 75 feet high. And the gallows in those days were not the gallows. Well, it's unlikely that they were the gallows that we think of. When we think of gallows, what do we think of? We think of hanging. Gallows in that time, they didn't normally hang people, they impaled them. So a 75-foot gallows, you would be impaled on a pole at the top of that. Yeah, that's horrible. And they would be there for some time to as a message to people. So yeah, generally speaking,
he wanted that in his backyard for Mordecai.
yeah, right, right.
And look at Mordecai's dead body hanging there every time he walked out his back door.
Yeah, Teresa's pointing out that the fact that it's in front of his house, that this is a place where he's going to be able to visualize it whenever he wants. You know, I saw a meme on Facebook the other day, or it was a reel. It was a reel, and it was a typical guy the day that he mows his lawn. And this guy, he'll go over and he'll look out the window after he's mowed his lawn, and he goes back, and he comes back a little later, and he looks, and I'm like, I can identify with that. That's me. After I mow my lawn, it's like, because it's like that one day that it really looks good. The next day it looks, a little less good, and then by the third, fourth day, it's like, oh man, why did I even do that? And so that's kind of like, that's like Haman. He's like, that's what he wants to do. He wants to get up in the morning, get his coffee, and just sit there and look at Mordecai impaled on the gallows, 75 feet in the air. I mean, we've seen through this that this is a wicked guy, and he's going to get what he deserves in this case. But what I want us to look at, I want us to think about with this, is the idea that that Esther's actions sometimes might make us feel a little uncomfortable as a Christian. That it doesn't seem Christ-like to it seems kind of toy with Haman, to kind of drag this along the way that she does. If it wouldn't, we wouldn't think it would be more Christ-like to just go and talk to him and offer a chance for repentance, or, it just doesn't seem that it's really what we would think of normally when we think of Christ-like behavior. But what I want us to look at this is along with a text in Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, where Jesus is sending out his disciples. And he uses this phrase. He says, "Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." Now, have you all heard that verse before? And has it ever been a verse that you've kind of wondered about? To be wise as a serpent? Is there, shrewd? In other translations, it'll use the word shrewd. But we would look at that and maybe have a little bit of, how do they fit together? How does being innocent as a dove and shrewd as a serpent come together? But I think what we look at with Esther is that shrewdness. There is this wise as a serpent mentality that she maintains as she brings about the sovereign plan of God, as she brings God's providential plan into being. And so we're going to look at that in the beginning from that perspective, the first 4 or 5 points on that. And I think we need to think about that when we consider how we are functioning in this world, how we're interacting with the world, how we're trying to make disciples, how we're standing against the enemy in the world that we live. And if Jesus said to his disciples, "I want you to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves," then maybe that applies to us too. I would say it absolutely does apply to us. And so we begin with this when we consider Esther's shrewd behavior. And it is that Esther makes her appeal to the king by avoiding impulsive actions. She's not impulsive. She is taking her time in bringing this about. And so she could have, the first day that she found out, she could have been run to the king and said, "King, you're going to believe this, but Haman has a plan hatched to kill all the Jews, and that includes me too." She may have done that, but I have to believe that was probably not the wisest thing. That would have not have been wise like a serpent. And so she avoids impulsive actions. Now, when we act impulsively, usually what are we acting on? Betty? What'd you say? No, well, when emotions, right, exactly, emotions, exactly. So emotions, and somebody said anger, I didn't hear, I couldn't tell what everyone was saying. But yeah, when we act on our emotions, we will usually act impulsively. Now, you've experienced that, right? In your home. Something happens that upsets you, and you're angry, and so you impulsively say something or do something. How's that work out for you? Usually doesn't work out too well, does it? When we act impulsive, it usually brings about problems and pain. And so Esther avoids impulsive action. She takes lots of time in order for this to happen. In fact, maybe even to the point, think about this, is that she's not even aware what Haman's doing with Mordecai. I mean, it would have been possible that Haman had Mordecai on the gallows before she realized it. Again, the sovereign providence of God that brings this about. But still, she takes her time. She's going to make sure all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. And as we looked at a couple weeks ago, we looked at taking the bait. The fact that she was just toying with him. She was bringing him in where she could set that hook where he was not going to get off. And so she avoided the impulsive action. Esther makes a request to the king in a manner that appeals to him personally. She is appealing to him on a personal level. It is not simply you as the king, you have the authority. It isn't a subject to king appeal. There's a personal level to this. She goes to him personally. In fact, doesn't even go on behalf of her people until she has gone on behalf of herself. Save my life, and then with that, my people. And so we see this personal appeal to her, and she's going to appeal to him personally. Now, how would that relate to the way that you act with people in this world? That you want to influence people in this world. You want to influence people in this world for the kingdom, right? But aren't there other ways you want to influence people in this world that are maybe in a positive way? And is not a personal appeal, a personal connection, a relationship always much more effective than any other means of approaching somebody? I mean, when you want something done, if you went out of a ticket, if you know somebody at the courthouse, that comes to your advantage, right? I'm not going just based on the fact I'm a citizen and I demand justice. No, it's like, hey, I know the DA. And so we appeal personally, and that's what she does. She goes to him on a personal level to appeal to him. When I believe that our opportunity to affect people, to win people evangelistically, is much more effective when we can appeal to them on a personal level. It isn't just simply, I'm not just going to start with, you're a sinner and you're going to hell apart from Christ. Now, at some point, that has to become a part of the conversation. But when I establish a relationship with somebody, then I'm able to get to that place where I can actually share that truth with somebody. And so she appeals to him on a personal level. She also makes her request to the king in a manner that appeals to him emotionally. In fact, what's his response to this? It's anger. She's going to appeal to him on an emotional level, and he's going to respond in the emotion of the moment. Now, we just looked at the danger of that, but from her perspective, this is going to bring about what she desires and ultimately what God wants. And so when she comes to him on an emotional level, there's a connection that isn't simply their relationship. There's an intimacy that experienced on them, and when he hears that somebody is out to get the queen, he's angry, and he's going to do something about it. And so she appeals to him on an emotional level. She makes her appeal, her request to the king, also in a manner that appeals to him materially. As she says to him, this is going to be a great loss for the king. That she is pointing out that he has something to lose in this, not simply in losing the queen, losing face, but he is going to materially lose as a result of this, of these actions. And we look there back at verse 4. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. Now, I look at that as as what? I think that's brilliant. It's brilliant, but is it true? I mean, from her perspective, is that true? Oh my goodness, what you're going to lose, king, compared to my freedom, that's nothing. You know, my freedom's nothing compared to what you're going to lose in this. I mean, she's appealing to him on a financial level. This is what you're going to materially lose in this. And from her perspective, I hope that's not true. Do you really think that? Boy, you know, this is going to be awful. What our freedom is nothing compared to what's going to happen to the stock market in Persia. And so again, I look at what she's doing, and I see this kind of cunning, this kind of maybe a little bit of a disingenuousness with him in order to get what she wants. And I believe this goes back to being wise like serpents, being shrewd in dealing with the world. That's what she's doing. Now, right, she's appealing. Right, and that's what she says. If I've found favor with you, what's she saying? She's appealing to him on a personal level. If I have pleased you, then grant my request. Her appeal is based in that manner, in that way, and so she's cashing in her points that she has stored up over the short time of their marriage. But all of those things, I believe we would look at in the world today. If somebody's behaving in that way, someone in the church, we would kind of maybe, I'm not sure about that. Not sure that's really a Christ-like thing to do. And yet what she's doing is ultimately bringing about God's plan. Now, she doesn't just like outright lie. She's just kind of skirting around the edges, right? It's like, I don't know, it's like she's going like 71 in a 70-mile zone. I don't know. It's like yeah, that's right. That's right. That would be the basis for that, Rodney. The fact that for them as slaves to be killed as opposed to being slaves would have a huge financial loss to them. That's right. And remember that Haman was putting money in the treasury to do this, which probably was part of the appeal of it. He's thinking simply we're going to get more money, not what are we going to lose by this. But yeah, absolutely. There is a truth to what she's saying, that yeah, this will harm you financially. It also could hurt him in the sense that you could bring division in the kingdom as a result of the actions that are being taken. And so she makes that appeal to him materially. So why is it that she has done it the way that she's done it? Why has she waited? Why has she been very methodical, very planned in how she reveals this to the king? Is it simply she's been afraid to? Do you get the sense that she's been afraid to do that, and now all of a sudden, okay, now I got the courage to do that? No, that doesn't seem to be the case, does it? It seems this is part of the plan. I'm bringing him in a little bit at a time. I'm bringing him in for these meals that go on for days, these alcohol parties that are going on for long periods of time. And now, at just the right moment, I'm going to spring it. I'm going to turn on him in that moment. So why the delay then? What is the purpose in what she's doing? Joel.
Well, I think we saw earlier when she approached the king, how cautious she was. So I don't think you just march in and tell the king, hey, this is what Haman's doing, I think we should hang him. She knows that she's not really in a position of authority, and so she has to set it up so it's the king is making the decision, and so she has to, curate this
Yeah.
thing so that at the end it looks like the king has made the decision completely on what to do with Haman.
Okay. So yeah, she would be. It would not be as effective if she just went in and blurted it out. But she has to kind of bring the king along, give the king the idea that this is his idea, that he's. It's like in your job. When you do something in your job, you do something good in your job, you always want to, in some way, you want your supervisor to somehow get a little bit of credit for it, right? Or at least if you want to use it to get in better with your supervisor, give him some credit for what has happened. And so in some way, that feeds the ego, that is more effective, and so she is doing this in a manner that's most effective. Teresa.
So part of me is thinking that she's responding to God's
Okay.
prompting by giving him, by giving that space so God can do what he wants to do.
Okay, so Teresa said, what Teresa said was that part of this probably is her responding to the prompting of God. She's being influenced to make decisions by God. Now, as godly people, as Christians, we would say, boy, I hope that's the case, right? That was what we would want. And so I think that also a legitimate, that what she's doing under the sovereign, providential guidance of God is doing in the timing that God wants it done. And that is happening because God is prompting her to do that. I believe that certainly could be true also. Other thoughts, Shirley? Uh-huh.
Not just for her, herself, but she wants to keep on the good side of the king.
Right. So Shirley's pointing out that in that culture, women would not have the stature to be able to just barge in and say, this is the problem. And so that she's tempered by that, by the fact that she's a woman in that culture. She has to approach it in a different manner. I believe that's true too. But I think you put all that together, whether it's the prompting of God, whether it is the reasoning that has been given in this kind of methodical, drawn out means of bringing this about. And I believe ultimately, though, it was going to bring it about in a manner that was most impactful. That this is going to have the greatest impact on the king, the way that it is presented. Because, I mean, when she gets him in there and she goes, it's that guy right there, that it couldn't have been more. I mean, if Haman wasn't in the room, if Haman was back at his house working on the gallows, and she would have said, look, I got to tell you this, it's Haman. I know you like Haman. I know he's your second in command. I know he's a good guy. But it's Haman who did this. And she didn't do it that way. When I look at this, when I look at the drama of this, I think this is what was going to have the most impact. God knows that, and Esther is aware of that, and she's going to bring it about in that manner. And so this reveal is going to be that which has the greatest impact on the king in that moment to bring about a change in the plans for what is about to occur with the Jewish people. And so, so we don't want to walk away from this. This isn't simply all about the shrewdness of Esther. And as Teresa, I think, appropriately pointed out there, she's acting on the prompting of God. And so this isn't just, I'm just a really smart individual. This is God's plan, his providential, divine, perfect plan unfolding.
I was just thinking, Haman went there after parading Mordecai around. If I was going there after parading Mordecai around, if I was Haman and I was offered a lot of wine, I would be drinking a lot of wine because I would be angry, I would be frustrated, and I would be drowning my sorrows. Just saying, which is probably why he fell all over the couch.
Yeah. Teresa is speculating, for people watching at home, Teresa is speculating that Haman came to the party distraught as a result of parading Mordecai around town. The wine was available. He overindulged in the wine and then fell on the couch. Shirley?
I think we have to remember, too, that the water was not as potable in that day, and they used to substitute wine for their fluids.
Okay, I had to point this out for anybody watching at home. Shirley is saying that the water was bad, and so the wine was just a substitute hydration method. So let's go back, though, because as I said, we don't want this to all be about Esther. And in fact, as we looked at just in the last week or two, there's very little of this that's about Esther. There's all these random things that occur brought about by the divine hand of God, the invisible hand of God that continues through this. And Esther's contributions are kind of just sporadic and minimal. She says, yes, I'll approach the king, and then really, until she approaches the king, really doesn't do much more until she, butters him up and then says, hey, this guy here, he's planning on killing me and my family. And that's really pretty much all the parts that she plays in bringing this about. And so we don't want to so focus the book of Esther on the heroism of Esther, but more pointedly on the sovereignty of God. And so we see this in it. And it is that God's sovereign action eventually brings about deserved justice. That this is a process that is drawn out, that isn't a quick resolution, but in it we're going to see eventually God's perfect justice is going to be accomplished. And we would go back to the beginning, in the moment that Haman has the king issue the order, the Jews will be killed. It's going to be a year from now. And people are distraught. People are upset. And right away we're like, oh my goodness, we've got to do something about this. What are we going to do? This is awful. And yet God's going to do something. But God's going to do something in God's timing. And so we see his sovereignty working, and it is eventually going to bring about justice. Now, we can look in the world today, and we can see really bad things happening in the world. And just last week, when someone goes into a school and kills 21 kids or whatever, or 21 people, whatever the number is at this point, I'm not even sure. And we look at that and think, somebody's got to do something about this. And of course, everybody's blaming everybody else. And what are we going to do about this? But we have this hope. We have this absolute certainty. God's justice will be done. That for somebody who's going through such a horrible thing right now, which I can't fathom, I can't imagine what those families are going through, but there is this hope that God's divine perfect justice will be accomplished at some time, at some point. That evil will be destroyed. God's word promises that. And so we can look at it simply in terms of an individual and that they will get the just justice that's due to them, but even more importantly, when it comes to the general evil in the world, God will deal with that one day. It'll be wiped out at some point because God's sovereign plan, his sovereign action eventually brings about justice, just as we see happened in this account. F.B. Meyer said, "A providence is shaping our ends. A plan is developing in our lives. A supreme and loving being is making all things work together for good." And it doesn't feel like that sometimes, but as Christ followers, Romans tells us that's true, that all things work together to the good for those that love the Lord. And so in some way, all the difficulty, all the challenges and problems that we're going through in this world, that in some way, God will bring them about for good in our lives as believers. His sovereign, perfect actions. God's justice is not always immediate, but God's justice is certain. And so we need to take comfort in that. We need to believe that. And so in this story, the justice seems to drag out. It seems to be delayed. And even as we're going to see, when it finally, there's still going to be Jewish people that die as a result of this. I mean, we could look at this and Esther's a hero, and they celebrate the fact that she preserved the Jewish people, but still Jewish people died as a result of what happened at that time. And so understanding this, that God's justice, we don't see it immediately, but it will eventually happen. It will be certain. In Proverbs chapter 29, verse 16, it says this: "When the wicked increase, transgression increases, but the righteous will look upon their downfall." Now, when I look at the wickedness in the world, and I think, man, I want that right there. I want to look on their downfall. I want to see the evil that's going on in the world, and I want to see those people pay for it. And in some way, God says the righteous will look upon that. We'll see their downfall someday. Now, I'm pretty certain that the majority of the evil that I will witness in my lifetime, I will not look down upon I will not look upon their downfall in my earthly life. I mean, we are awash in evil, and I'm pretty confident that there are people who are committing evil that will never pay for it. Will never. I mean, in an earthly sense. So I believe that ultimately what he's talking about here is in an eternal sense. That we look at the evil and we are frustrated and agonize over that, but we have this confidence that one day, and in all likelihood, we're speaking of eternity, we will see the downfall of those who've committed those evil acts. And so at the end of this, the great irony of this, that Haman works so hard, conspiring and building this against Mordecai, builds a gallows in order to impale Mordecai on the gallows. And the great irony is what? That he himself is going to the gallows. He is going to be put on the gallows that he has built or has had built for Mordecai. And so I think there's a great truth to that for us even as Christians. And it is that when we build, when we work in wickedness, that eventually we will experience the pain of that. And so just as it was with Haman, wickedness always creates its own gallows. There's always a payday associated with it. And I would say this, that that's true in an earthly sense. That we do things, wickedness, and it will one day that we will be paying for it. We will be on a gallows of sorts. But in some manner, it comes back to us. And in Proverbs 26, verse 27, it says this. It says, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and a stone will come back on him who starts it rolling." This proverb speaking of the very thing that we see here with Mordecai. He dug a pit. He built a gallows, and he ended up on the gallows. He rolled the stone, and the stone rolled over him. It was the gallows. And so as Christ followers, we have this great hope of eternity, that the sins that we've committed, the sins that we have repented of, the sins that God has separated as far as the east is from the west, there will be no ramification. There'll be no eternal payment for those. But we need to understand this, that when we sin in the flesh, in the world, there are ramifications. There are gallows. There are pits that we fall into. And that's what happens. And so rest assured, as a Christ follower, you don't carry that into eternity. But let's not forget that as we live in the human flesh, if we're going to engage in the wickedness of this world, there'll be a price to pay in an earthly sense. There will be consequences as a result of our disobedience in this world and in this life. And so Haman, as we close this, ends up impaled on the gallows. And interestingly, the king's anger was abated. As this chapter ends, the king now takes a deep sigh and he's no longer angry anymore because the evil has been dealt with. Any thoughts or questions or comments? Joel?
It goes back to the first item, but if you're the person who stands up to point the finger and you complain about somebody else, about half of the people only look and see that, this guy complaining about it. They don't even hear the message.
Uh-huh.
Right? So, for Esther to go in and just rant and rave
Oh,
or
okay.
something,
Yeah.
that was never going to be impactful. She wanted
Yeah.
to make sure that wanted to make sure that she wholly got the point across and didn't have half of that attention go to, the king could have been like, what's all this crazy woman from my harem? Like,
Yeah.
she needed to make sure she didn't miss delivering the message properly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same can be said in our lives. You respond to somebody, even if the other person was completely at fault, if you respond poorly, then it takes away from what you thought you were accomplishing, which was to maybe call out the wrong, but instead you
Yeah.
caused attention on yourself for blowing up or whatever.
Right. So Joel's pointing out that when we act impulsive, we may have great intentions of really accomplishing something, but most of the time, those impulsive, emotional appeals are less effective. They really don't accomplish what we think they do. I think that everyone appreciates an emotional, part of the message has an emotional impact to it. But when it's all emotion, when it is simply, what seems to be a rant, it begins to lose its power and effectiveness. Betty, were you?
To add to what Joel was saying, if we go back, like you said, it had been 30 days since he had called on Esther. So even though when she went and he accepted her coming in and all, I think she was still hesitant, and I think she went slowly because she wanted to reconnect with him to make sure of her standing, because she knew who Haman was, and she knew of his standing with the king. So like Joel said, instead of just going in and pointing her finger
Yeah.
at him, she maybe was still not too sure
Yeah.
where her standing was with the king because he hadn't called on her
Right.
for so long. So I think she was trying to rebuild that relationship with the king so that he would take what she had to say more to heart than if she would just, even though he offered her the kingdom to have the kingdom right off the bat.
Right.
I think she wanted to make sure what her standing was.
Betty's pointing out that maybe part of the motivation for her lack of impulsiveness, her slow approach to this, was the uncertainty of her relationship with the king. The king had not called for her in 30 days. And so there wasn't that confidence that the king is just going to be granting whatever it is that I want. And so there was this slow process of making certain that her relationship with him was going to be able to produce an action like she wanted.
But going back to what Teresa said, though, too, I think she was probably praying for him this period of time, too, to ask
Yeah.
God's guidance on
Yeah, as we talked about the fact that the invisible hand of God, the providence of God that is throughout this, we don't want to completely separate the providence of God from Esther's actions as somehow they were completely independent of one another. The providence of God probably is directing Esther to act in the right times. And we can say the same thing with you. We talked last week about the fact that what's required of you maybe is just, okay, it's just this little piece of it. It's just this is all I need, if I can say it this way, God, this is all I need you to do. I just need you to do this. This is your responsibility. Don't you worry about anything else. I'll take care of everything else. But within that, God is prompting you, okay, now's the time. Here's the time for you to take action. And so we're not completely divesting sovereignty of God from human action.
And something I couldn't understand was at the end, Esther had all 12 of his sons home.
Of Haman's sons. Well, we're not to that point yet, so you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about it yet.
And I'm going to ask a question. So does the king, all he has to do is say, you're my queen, and then they're like married? Or do they get married then?
I don't know what the Persian custom was for marriage, whether it was just, I would assume as the king, he just has to say, I'll take that one, and it's probably done at that point. That's right. That would be my guess, that it isn't, he's the king. It's good to be king. Well, we talked about that, didn't we? I mean, that was part of the beginning of this, the fact that Esther didn't behave in upright moral manners in this. I mean, she was part of a harem. She slept with him before she married him. And now I understand. She was living in a culture where if you refuse to do that, probably at best you're going to be end up a slave in somebody's quarters, but at worst probably die. I understand that, but that doesn't change the fact that she behaved in an immoral fashion in this. I think so. I think that there were, he was the king for over 20 years, and I think a large portion of that time she was the queen. But I'd have to look that up again. Well, there were people that followed. I mean, people of his family who became kings. Again, we're going to have to Wikipedia that one. All right. Well, let's close. I think the kids are ready to come in and sing. Father, thank you for our time in your word. Thank you for this study. And I pray, Lord, that there's a lesson for us there in how we interact with the world. The God, we are called to be cunning like snakes, wise like snakes, but innocent as doves. Help us, Lord, to interact with the world in a way that's appropriate, in a way that brings about your plan, your perfect plan. And so as we close our time together, Lord, just seal the truth of your word in our hearts and send us home. We thank you, and we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.